Ya, bawa itu.
Good evening, good morning, good evening.
All right, good day, everyone, and welcome to this special event titled Path to Canadian Permanent Residency. We'd also like to extend a warm welcome to our recruitment partners from around the world. We are truly honored to have participants from across the globe joining us today. Whether you're an inspiring student, a current OCMT student, or one of our valued recruitment partners, this session is for you. It's an opportunity to learn more about OCMT and how it can be a stepping stone on your path to Canadian permanent residency. If you're considering applying to OCMT, now is a great time to do so. Just visit www.ocmtontario.ca and click Apply Now. Today's session's aim Today's session aims to shed light on the Canadian immigration system with a special focus on how OCMT students can transition from private college to permanent residency. This event is tailored for our student community and potential students, offering valuable insights. Featuring a guy who takes all bullets, Yomi, and of course, our special guest, Donovan Francis, managing lawyer from Goose Law Firm. But before we hear from them, if you have specific inquiries for the Goose Law Firm after this event, please send detailed requests to OITI initiative at ocmtontario.ca as shown on your screens. Now let's dive into the heart of our discussion. We have some important questions lined up for Donovan, and these questions have been curated to provide you with valuable insights into the Canadian immigration system and the path to permanent residency. So, welcome, Donovan. Thank you for joining us today. Let's kick things off by bringing in Yomi with our first question. Over to you, Yomi.
All right, Nike, thank you so much for the intro. And again, thanks to everybody that sort of joined us on this call. I know that it's probably sort of late for some people right now. It's about 6 p.m. in some parts of the world right now. So we're very excited to have you here. And during the course of this conversation, you're going to be hearing a lot from our the managing partner at Ghost Law Firm, and I'm going to be moderating this event so that everybody got a sense of how you can sort of transition from being a student at OCMT to sort of regularizing your stay in Canada. So, and if you've not been accustomed to fireside chat, so you have that experience today. And so what that means is I will be asking a bunch of questions from Donovan from Goose Law Firm. And with that question has sort of been taken, collated from different sides. These questions would, substantially address some of your concerns when it comes to regularizing your state in Canada. Okay. So as Nike have said, my name is Yomi Olalere, and I am representing OCMT. So Donovan, so thanks for joining us. Do you want to, make a brief statement or sort of, let the audience know who you are?
Thanks, Yomi. Thanks for having me. Hello, everybody. Good to be here. So I lead a law firm, an immigration law firm with head office in Mississauga, which is part of the Greater Toronto area. We provide immigration support exclusively, and we provide support to individuals, like international students. We provide support to businesses who need immigration support for their employees and so on. So that's
Okay, if you are playing music, please turn off your music completely. At this point, please shut every music and make sure that you're on mute. Okay. So for those who are playing music, we're going to have to take you out. Okay. So it's very important that everybody sort of, pay attention to the protocols. No music whatsoever, and no, unmuting until you are requested to do so. Please, please go ahead, Donovan.
Yes.
Yeah.
So as I was saying, I hope that you will all find value from my responses to whatever questions you'll be throwing at me at the end of this presentation.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Donovan, and it's really great to be to have you here. I know that it takes a lot with your schedule to sort of get you here. So Donovan, Goose Law Firm is one of the respected law firm in Canada, and we are so glad to have you here. I'm just going to get straight into it, and some of these questions are meant to provide substantial information from different sides of Canadian immigration system. So my first question is this. So we all agree that Canadian immigration system can be very complex. So I'm sure you're probably going to be the first person, to know that the immigration system in Canada can be very complex. When you go to IRCC website, so you're trying to navigate your way through. So one screen leads to another screen, and the other screen leads to another page. So you kind of get confused or get sort of entangled in the web of confusion, right? So now, but oftentimes this sort of complexity introduces a lot of doubts and sort of questions about whether an individual is really qualified to sort of apply for Canadian immigration or not. Can you throw some light into immigration path to obtaining residency in Canada? Can you throw some light into that? So, generally, please.
Yeah, thank you. So generally, Canada's immigration system is designed to grant permanent residency to people who are going to be able to contribute to Canada in some way or form. And so because of that, the system is designed around primarily, like the federal system is designed primarily around a points-based system known as express entry. In essence, the government seeks to grant permanent residency to people who score points based on 4 major factors. One of those factors is your education level. You know, the more highly educated you are, the more points you get. You know, add to that the fact that if you have Canadian education, you get extra points. So that's one of the first prongs. The second thing is professional work experience. You know, people who have work experience in certain professional type jobs, you know, may be able to secure extra points. The third factor has to do with your ability in speaking English and or French, right? So that's going to be important. And there's actually a language test that many persons here may be familiar with that you'd have to go through in order to show that you're competent in one of these two languages. And then the fourth thing has to do with age. You know, they're trying to attract people who are ideally between the ages of, say, 20 and 32. You know, not that the door is closed to people who are older than 32, not at all. But the permanent residency system is designed in such a way to give more points to people who fall within that age range. So generally speaking, those are going to be factors that anybody wanting to apply for permanent residency will have to take into consideration. Of course, Yomi, it's also important to note that depending on where you're applying from, that will likely impact your ability to get permanent residency as well. For instance, somebody who's come to Canada as a student, as an international student, and is then applying for permanent residency from inside Canada will likely stand a greater chance because they would have had Canadian work study. They would have completed Canadian studies, which adds to their overall point score, and also which opens them up to applying under certain permanent residency options that would not be available to somebody outside of Canada. You know, and we can talk more about those afterwards. You know, there's one option, for instance, that's called the Canadian Experience class for people who are here, who've worked here for a year. You know, there are options for permanent residency for people who've studied in Canada within certain provinces and so on and so forth. But we can talk more as we go along.
Excellent, good stuff. So thanks for that insight. And I think we all agree that there are sort of advantages to those who are already in Canada. Because I can remember, I came to Canada 2 decades ago, 20 years ago, and within that, I mean, at that time there were sort of more stringent conditions to getting permanent residence in Canada. But over the years, because of the need, because of the national need for experienced workforce and because of the aging population in the country, so you would probably agree with me that there has been a lot of policy shift from more stringent conditions to more tolerant conditions. So which is very good for those who have the opportunity to be here. So you said something about those that are already here. Now, in terms of those who are already here being able to qualify for this opportunity, you have to agree that not everybody that is within Canada would have the opportunity to gain certain level of competitive advantages over those who are outside of Canada. So you must be in Canada with the right status, right? So you must have certain status and you must make sure that you are not sort of contravening any sort of laws and all of that. Can you throw some light into some of those things? While in Canada, there are different kind of people in Canada maintaining different kind of statuses. So we have people on study permit, we have people temporary resident, we have visitors and all of these folks. So at what point within the quadrant should you be to gain a competitive advantage over others? Please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, coming as an international student is first and foremost going to give you that advantage. The truth is that most people who eventually successfully apply for permanent residency in Canada today actually first came as international students, right? So the statistics bear that out. So just by virtue of having studied here, that gives you a competitive advantage. But I mean, as lawyers, it's also important for us to point out, and I believe you hinted at this, Yumi, that I mean, being here in and of itself does not assure you or guarantee you permanent residency, right? And that is also important because your ability to acquire permanent residency is going to be dependent on your marketability, your ability to work inside Canada, because many of the permanent residency streams have within them, I mean, with few exceptions, there's a general requirement that you either would have worked inside Canada or have some kind of a job offer from a Canadian employer, right? So it means, therefore, that you have to be, if you're coming as an international student, you want to be ensuring that you're pursuing a line of study that is going to put you in an in-demand profession, right? Because all of that is going to be important towards getting you into permanent residency. The other thing is that if you come here as a student, you want to ensure that you maintain your status. And in essence, that means you don't want to end up in a situation where your study permit has expired and you've not renewed it, or you've breached the terms, the conditions that were originally imposed on the study permit and so on, because those things are going to be taken into consideration at the point in time when your permanent residency is being assessed. There's something called inadmissibility, and one can be inadmissible for permanent residency for a number of reasons. Some of them are more severe than others. Somebody can be inadmissible because of a criminal history, or because of certain types of illnesses, or so on and so forth. But somebody can also be inadmissible because they've contravened the regulations, the immigration regulations in Canada, one of which could be that you didn't conform or abide by the conditions on your study permit. So those are important things to know as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Donovan. And I think you probably have addressed my second question, which talks about among all these options that are available, for the students to, regularize their status in Canada. So you've talked about, we talked about express entry, we talked about federal skilled worker program. There is also provincial nomination. So we have provincial nomination. We have Northern Canada, immigration program. We have Atlantic immigration program. There is also the rural area program, as well as startup visa program, right? So there are sort of myriads of options available to those who are eligible and they have stayed within the confinement of their permit at any point in time. But before I sort of give you, that ask you that question, let me quickly enunciate on the what some of the things you've talked about, which was making sure that you don't violate your permit, making sure that you don't violate the condition on your immigration permit at any point in time. So that reminds me of a situation that happened in Saskatchewan, whereby 2 international students were caught working over the hours that have been allocated on their study permit at a Walmart in Saskatchewan. Despite the immigration, despite all the sort of, apology and letters from different NGO, they were actually deported back to their country because they violated the condition of their study permit, which is very important to make sure that if you intend to transition to stay in Canada, make sure that you are actually abiding by the rules and the regulation, as stated on your study permit. So I like the fact that you touched that point. Very good. Now, among all these sort of various immigration programs, available, which ones would you say are there ones that are easier to get than others? And if there are ones that are easier to get than others, how could an international student position themselves? What kind of program should they be taking that would give them that upper hand? Please go ahead.
Yeah, good question. So I mean, none of them is easy, but there may be some that may be more accessible to people in certain kinds of professions, and I'll elaborate. So let's take the federal programs that are available under Express Entry as an example. The government of Canada recently made some changes to that particular permanent residency program to allow for people from certain career areas to be given preference, to be invited, to be issued an invitation to apply.
You want to grow your career?
Specifically, what the government has done is they recognize that there's a high demand for people in the tech space, in the STEM space. So science, technology, engineering, and math, STEM. So that's a high demand area. Another high demand area is healthcare, right? And so given that, what they've done is now under the Express Entry program. So Express Entry is the government system that it uses to identify people with the highest number of points. Remember, I talked about the point system. All Express Entry does is select those people who have the highest number of points, okay? But what the government is now doing is it's allowing people from STEM careers or healthcare careers to be the ones who are being selected at certain particular points in time. Okay, so you have what is called a STEM draw. So maybe every other month or so, the government may say, well, this month we're only targeting people from STEM professions. And so they go in and they identify people there. And what that may mean is that sometimes the overall point score may end up being lower because they're targeting a very specific group of people. And the same applies for people in the healthcare industry. So to your question, Yomi, if there's particular career area, that you might want to focus on, just based purely on kind of the government's own preferences at this particular point in time, it would be more skewed towards the STEM area or towards healthcare. If you're somebody who's looking to use the study route as a means to get to Canada. Something else that you will want to look at as well is you will want to understand what the provincial option is, in your case, in Ontario, for international students, right? So every province has their own set of immigration options that can allow you to become a permanent resident. This is separate and apart from Express Entry, right? Express Entry is managed by the federal government. But separate and apart from that, there are still other avenues to become a permanent resident, right? And these avenues are dependent on the province within which you are. So generally speaking, most provinces have a route for international students to apply for permanent residency without having to go through Express Entry. Ontario, the province of Ontario, has its own international student route towards permanent residency. And so that is something else that you will want to bear in mind when you're making a decision around where to study.
Excellent, excellent. So thanks so much. And it's always very sort of exciting to understand that folks have options, and you are not restricted to a particular option. And the fact that you don't have the policy, there is sort of there's a policy variance from the federal government, so it does not in itself restrict you to exploring the available opportunities in the country. And before I sort of get to the next question, like a kind of follow-on question to my earlier question, just to throw some light, we know that immigration have different kind of there's different kind of immigration pathways here in Canada, and one of the things that will probably be of good information to our audience today is to understand that Canadian government look at the need. So the immigration system in Canada is largely based on the need. So we kind of need-based immigration system. So we have federal level. At the federal level, the federal will tell you that this is how much immigrants that the country will welcome this year. I think this year is about 450,000 people thereabout. So
yeah,
Yeah, so they look at sort of how many, so what is the federal government doing? Then each province will make their own sort of, each province has their own autonomy to sort of determine where are we lacking? So what kind of workforce do we need? And that's based generally on the request from the employers. So employers will sort of, they provide feedback to the provincial government that, okay, this is where we have a gap. So can you help us here? Then from that, we also have the municipal level from the rural area, rural setting, and all of that. So this kind of gives the those who are already here and outside of Canada an opportunity to explore different parts. So Donovan, to some of the things you've said, would you? What are the options for those who are in the province of Ontario who wants to sort of relocate to different provinces? So I'll give you an example. So OCMT is based in Ontario. And I feel that, you know what, after completing my study, I want to move out to Alberta. I want to move out to Saskatchewan. I want to move out to the Manitoba, or I want to go to Yukon Territory. So how easy it is and what must be done to make sure that, these things are done meticulously? Please go ahead.
Yeah. So first off, I mean, the first thing perhaps the most important thing to understand is that most of these permanent residency options are going to be contingent on you having a job offer from an employer, right? That's a crucial element for most permanent residents, not all, but most, especially at the provincial level. As you rightly intimated, Yomi, at the provincial level, it's based on demand. So if employers recognize that there's a great demand for tech workers, they may have a program there that's geared towards helping employers find tech workers. But ultimately, you as an international student will need, once you're done, will need to secure a job offer from an employer, right? And that applies pretty much across the board, no matter what province you're looking to go to. So in a lot of ways, that is going to be the major determinant. That's what's going to determine if you go to Saskatchewan or if you stay in Ontario. Ultimately, it's where the job offer is coming from. So that's going to be very important. That said, the province in which you studied is important because typically they have a permanent residency option that is available to graduates from certain institutions within the province, right? So somebody who graduates from an Ontario province may likely stand a greater chance of applying for permanent residency through through the specified provincial program for international students in Ontario, right? While if that person were to move to Saskatchewan, they would be disadvantaged because they would not be able to apply under a similar option in Saskatchewan. But it doesn't mean that they can't apply for permanent residency from Saskatchewan, because there may be other options that will open up to them once they are able to get a job offer. So I think if you take nothing else away from this response, just note that having a valid job offer is ultimately going to be a major determinant in your ability to successfully apply for permanent residency when you're done studying.
Excellent. So, I mean, I think I couldn't agree more. Your sort of perspective about cross-provincial immigration system and what are the things required to get to. I mean, basically, wherever you want to go, you want to make sure that you have soft landing, and that soft landing is in the area of employment opportunity, right? So, and that's just to sort of one of the things that OCMT does is to sort of make sure that what do you need to attract a job is the skill. And if you have the skill, it makes your journey a lot easier. So, and that's why when you look at some of the programs that OCMT offers are largely tech-based. So then comes the question that, are there some specific advantages? I know you sort of mentioned, you touched on this earlier on. Are there some specific advantages to graduating from STEM-based programs over others who might probably be studying something in hospitality, so to speak? Has there been any sort of recent policy changes that favors those in STEM-based programs? Please go ahead.
Yeah, well, the policy change I spoke to around permanent residency under express entry, where there's an emphasis on STEM. But generally speaking, you are going to be advantaged by focusing a lot on tech type professions or healthcare type professions. And I'll just give you an example. As a law firm, on a monthly basis, we handle roughly around 60 or so different work permit applications. And that is almost always exclusively for people in the tech space, right? Coming to Canada, being brought to Canada by their employers, right? So tech definitely, people, whether they're in the software side of things or the hardware side of things, artificial intelligence, whatever, tech and engineering are high demand areas. And then, of course, there's healthcare as well. That's a lucrative area. So those are definitely areas that one would want to focus on. And the government has even kind of made special allowances for Canadian employers to hire foreign nationals in some of these professions. For instance, an employer wanting to hire somebody as in a tech role or an engineering role is able to do so after applying for a special type of labor market impact assessment, an LMIA. So just generally speaking, Canadian employers need to get government authorization first before they can hire a non-Canadian, right? Including an international student who does not have a work permit, right? So an international student who does not have a work permit, in order for them to work in Canada, they need to find an employer who has gotten special authorization to hire them. That special authorization is known as an LMIA, a labor market impact assessment. Now, the LMIA, the employer, it is usually a challenge for the employer to apply for the LMIA because the employer has to post job advertisements and, jump through a lot of hoops. However, if you are in a tech role or an engineering role and that employer wants to hire you, that employer is able to apply for this LMIA without needing to jump through most of those hoops, right? It's a special type of LMIA known as the global talent stream, right? So the employer does not have to advertise, right? So there's no waiting period and all of those things. So that's another kind of special program that the government has created that's targeted primarily at the tech industry, and it's designed to help tech employers who are looking for tech and engineering workers to support their Canadian businesses.
Excellent, very good. So and that sort of provide a good sort of landing for those who wants to kind of channel that route. Now, this program specifically for OCMT student or OCMT or upcoming or OCMT student or OCMT prospect. So depending on the category that you have. Now, what we have kind of one of the measures we're trying to put in place here to help our student transition to permanent resident is to make sure that they have not only the sort of their diploma here, not only being involved in tech, but also to sort of have the internship, which they can sort of use as a gateway, give them a foot on the door to employers. Now, so we talk about getting into or converting your study or transitioning from study to residency. Now, if I want to, if I had a prior work experience from my home country, so I'm coming from any part of Africa and I had prior 3 years or 5 years work experience. Now I have come to Canada as a student. Now, do I qualify to apply for permanent residence while studying my program? At what point can I start applying for permanent residence, and how do I make sure that my file is updated with IRCC upon completing my diploma program? Can you shed more light on that, if you don't mind?
Yeah, good question. So, I mean, you could apply for permanent residency from your home country without ever setting foot in Canada, right? So that's the first thing. But it's just that it's harder for you to apply successfully without having the advantage of having studied in Canada or having worked in Canada or so on. However, I mean, there are many cases of people who've applied successfully for permanent residency from outside Canada. The important thing is that in order for you to be successful, you would have to be somebody who's highly educated, typically somebody who has at least a master's degree, somebody who's worked at a professional level for at least 3 years, somebody who is fluent in English and ideally both English and French, and somebody who's married to a partner who's equally well educated and equally well competent in English and or French. So it is possible to apply directly from outside of Canada, but your chances of success are going to increase significantly if you've completed studies inside of Canada, right? And I say completed rather than started, right? Because starting your studies in Canada in and of itself doesn't improve your permanent residency chances. You would have to complete your program of studies, and then you are assigned points based on the fact that you've studied in Canada, which would be additional points on top of the points you would get for having already had a first degree or second degree or third degree, whatever your education is, right? So I'm hoping that addresses the question, Yomi.
Yes. So the now I think yes, that sort of address the question, but also sort of engineer more questions, right? So when it comes to international students studying and all of that, I would like to know to the point of specificity. So I joined OCMT today. So, and I'm already well into my program. So I've completed 4 semesters in my program, and I want to apply for permanent resident in Canada. So coming from back home, I already had my prior bachelor, or I already had a prior diploma from back home.
Yeah.
Now I want to apply for permanent resident in Canada. Now, can I apply now, then update my file with IRCC after I might have completed my program to sort of increase my points? That's number one. Number two, after I have applied, what are the constraints? So can I still travel out of the country if I have my application in processing? So can you please address those areas?
Sure. So you can start your express entry profile application at any point. You can start it even before you come to Canada. You can start it when you get to Canada, right? It's important to know that that's going to be valid for 1 year, right? So you could have started your application, your permanent residency application under express entry, and then within that year you've finished your studies in Canada, you can then update your profile with this new information, which is the fact that you've now completed your studies in Canada, and then the system will generate your new points count based on that. So that can be done at any point in time. Okay, that's the first thing. To address your second question, so your ability to leave or re-enter Canada is going to be dependent on the validity of the visa that you hold. When you're wanting to come to Canada, unless you're coming from what is called a visa exempt country. So there are 2 types of countries as far as Canada is concerned, right? There are what are called visa exempt countries, meaning countries whose citizens are not required to get a visa to fly to Canada. They can simply buy their airline ticket, quickly get something called an ETA, and board a flight and come to Canada, okay? But then there's another set of countries called the visa required countries. Most countries in the world fall under this category, and citizens from those countries must first apply for a visa from outside Canada. So you submit your application to the Canadian consular office in your country, and you're issued your visa. So that's a visa, and that visa helps you to fly to Canada, fly to the airport. But that visa does not allow you to stay in Canada. In order for you to stay in Canada, you need something separate, which is called a status document. Okay? And that status document can be your study permit, which gets issued when you land at the airport, or it can be a work permit, or it can be what's called a visitor record for visitors. But ultimately, you need those two things. And so you could technically be here as a student, right? Technically, as a student on a valid study permit for a year or 2 years, but your visa could have expired. And if your visa expires, it means that you can leave Canada, but you can't re-enter until you have a new visa. Are you following? So,
Yes.
so your ability to re-enter Canada is dependent on the validity of your visa. Now, generally speaking, the visa duration is usually going to be at least tied to the duration of your study permit. But that's not the case in every instance. For instance, if your passport is going to expire within a year or so, that's when your visa is also going to expire, right? And your study permit. But more often than not, your visa and your study permit do not expire at the same time. And so it's going to be important that if you want to leave Canada, that you seek to apply to renew your visa, right? So that you can re-enter Canada. Nobody's going to block you from leaving Canada, but getting back in will not be possible without a visa. So that addresses your question about one's ability to leave Canada and re-enter.
Excellent, very good. Because what actually inspired that question was that we've had cases of not OCMT. Thankfully, we've had cases of international students leaving the country and not being able to return to the country for one reason or the other. So I'm happy that you shed light on that, and I'm also and I'm happy that we have listeners so listening in to sort of understand the dichotomy between all these differences, because come to think of it, this can be very convoluted, can be quite confusing when you kind of thinking about all of this. And I have seen some students that will say that, okay, when I finish my study, are they going to kind of, just push me on the plane and they send me back to where I belong, or, like back to sender? So I always tell people that, no, Canada is not really interested in sending people back if you are a value add proposition to the country. So Canada is not interested in sort of saying, okay, we throw our hand out, okay, go back to your country, except you have criminal record or you have severely violated the condition on your permit. So I always kind of let people understand that this country need people, but just like you said, they need the right people. So they need people who can sort of contribute economically to the country. And quite frankly, this is not too much of, by contributing to the country, you're also contributing to yourself. So you are also improving in the country. So the country is cooperating with your vision, your mission in life, as far as your career and your settlement is concerned, your family and all of that, as well as it is kind of symbiotic. So the country wants you. You also want the country. You want an environment where you can sort of blossom and express your career and your skill in a more rewarding manner. So thanks for sort of throwing light on that. I think moving forward, the OCMT is, encourages innovation. We encourage, ideas that can be commercialized among our students. We always trumpet, this to our students that, okay, you can come to Canada, you can look for jobs, but you can also create jobs. So it's not just you looking for jobs, it's also for you to create jobs. And I have had that experience. So I'm kind of a living, so I'm a kind of living reference to that experience. Whereas, so you have an idea, or you have an invention, and all of that. So I had an opportunity to meet with the Minister for Immigration, this about 3 months ago at the coalition. I mean, you were also at the coalition, and you were also speaking at that event. So I remember. So where the new policy was introduced about people from the United States, if you have H-1B visa from the United States, and how the policy was sort of, shifted in favor of those people from the United States and all of that. Now, can you throw light? And I'm specifically requesting this from you because I know that your firm recently signed a strategic partnership with, I think, Venture Capital Incubator in Toronto. So can you speak, can you speak to that subject? How can you as a student own a business and, get funding for that business and, get visa or get permanent resident through that business or through that piece of innovation? What are the strategic steps that you must take to sort of, explore the opportunity around that area? Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And that's a really timely question. So within Canada, there are many startup ventures, and incubators and different government-funded entities that are all geared towards building up an indigenous tech industry, right? One of those entities, it's a tech incubator. It's called Venture Lab. They're out of Toronto and they're government funded. They focus a lot on tech and semiconductors and so on. And as you indicated, we were able to sign an agreement with them to become their preferred immigration partner. But they're just an example of many other tech related entities that are geared towards finding international and local startups to support with an eye for making them into significant, meaningful businesses and companies inside Canada and internationally. And so, like what we do, for instance, we provide support to a lot of people who have built startups, but who might not necessarily have the finances to get it where it needs to go. So in Canada, for instance, there's a program called the Startup Visa Program that is geared towards, tech founders, inside Canada and outside of Canada who have, they've started building a product and they need to really get it to a point where it's going to take off. There are targeted programs that help persons, these types of founders, to be able to apply for a visa, startup visa, to come to Canada to have this company grow inside Canada. Now, the way it works is that for that to be successful, these founders would first need to identify what's called a designated organization inside Canada. And this organization would help them with funding, in return for some kind of equity in the business, of course. It would help them with mentoring. It would connect them to all the resources they need and so on. So Venture Lab, for instance, is one such designated organization that provides funding. There are others that are like venture capitalists and so on. All of these are designed to help startup founders to come to Canada and to build their companies here. But an important step is to first get the buy-in of a designated organization. But I think to your bigger point, Yomi, there are opportunities for people who've moved to Canada, like yourself, like myself, to build our own businesses, and to leverage the different resources that are out there. And so the startup visa is going to be a very viable option for somebody who has a very good product, a very good tech product that needs support.
Excellent, very good, and I'm kind of that area is of a particular interest to me because I tend to sort of play some sort of rocket in that space as well. So I like tech innovation a lot, and everything that we do at OCMT is really to sort of prepare you to be innovative, to be inventive, and not only to become an entrepreneurially minded graduate. So whether you see yourself as a business owner in Canada or you see yourself as an employee working for an organization, so having that entrepreneur kind of mindset to be able to add substantial value to your organization, it's always very, very important. Now, within that term, if you look at, I ran some statistics, recently about the global startup ecosystem. And I found out that 25% of the United States unicorn business, I'm talking about when I say unicorn, multi-billion-dollar company, were founded by international students, right? So if you look at Applied Board is currently valued at about $4 billion right now. Applied Board the guy was an international student, in London, Ontario, a few years back. So there is an opportunity for sort of students to bring their creativity and their innovative mind into a country. So I always tell people that, relocation does not really mean limitation, right? So when you relocate to a new country, it's always an opportunity for you to actually bring, whatever you were working on that you felt they were not moving very well where you're coming from. Maybe in a different environment, maybe there can be some sort of speed, or it can be a will in terms of a policy, in terms of funding and all of that, that can sort of catapult you to a different level. So there are different kind of possibilities that exist within that ecosystem. So I'm happy you shed light on it, that, okay, startup visa is for those, whether you are here in Canada as a student, or you're here as a permanent resident, or you're outside of Canada, startup visa is also for you. Now, it gives you a better advantage. I'll give you an example. If you are studying cybersecurity and intelligence engineering, for example, and you have a piece of innovation in cybersecurity, so it actually sort of lend more credibility to that aspect, because when you're sort of telling
You've been muted, Yomi. You've been muted.
Oh, sorry. Oh, can you hear me, guys? You can hear me? Yeah. So these are some of the possibilities that exist within that ecosystem. Now, moving forward, Donovan, can you sort of, you guys have been in this business for a long time, and I think you've probably, you've assisted, your firm assisted one of our students who was coming from India to Canada, who was able to apply once and was able to get his visa, at one time without any sort of hassle. From your experience, what has been the success rate, for your company in terms of, processing either the study visa or either the permanent resident applications for students? What has been the success rate?
Sorry, there was some interruption there, but I think you were asking about our overall success rate.
Yes, in terms of overall success rate from processing permanent resident application for an internal applicant, not external applicants, from internal applicants. So can you just speak a little bit on that?
Yes. So we have an excellent success rate for permanent residency applications. We have an excellent success rate for work permit applications. Our success rate for student application is at the same level as the industry is at. Now, I need to point something out as far as study permit applications is concerned. We're a law firm, and because of that, we are obligated to be candid about the pros and the cons of making your Canadian application. And one of the challenges that some study permit applicants have is that depending on the country they're coming from, they encounter a higher than average rate of refusal. Okay, this is something that's statistically proven, and it's something that has been brought up even at the parliamentary level. And so that's going to be an important factor. And we're very candid in, when it comes to study permit applications, especially for applicants coming from countries that are deemed to be not as economically stable as, others. We're candid and we say your chances of success are likely going to be impacted by where you're coming from. And so because of that, our approach is to encourage applicants to go above and beyond. So if you're asked to provide, 2 documents, or you're not asked to provide a document at all, we say, you know what, give us 2 or 3 documents to substantiate this particular claim, even though it's not required, because we understand that those are factors that ultimately will impact your application. No, I'm saying that to let you know that across the industry, no matter which immigration lawyer you deal with, when it comes on to study permit applications, the success rate isn't going to be on par with, say, the success rate for permanent residency applications or even work permit applications. Okay, so our rate as far as study permit application is concerned is right up there with all the other performers in the industry. But it's important for everybody to note that you have to be proactive. You have to be smart when you're submitting these applications, and know that your history, your geography, all of those things may come into consideration, and therefore you have to plan strategically on how you're going to be addressing those.
Excellent, very good. So being sort of straightforward and let people understand, the actual statistics is very important. We are talking about reputation here. One of the ways, one of the things that we always tell our students is that, one, as an educational institution, our core responsibility is to educate you. What you do with that diploma is now up to you. So whether you're making millions out of that diploma or you're making billions out of that diploma, that's up to you. Whether you get a managerial position, an analyst position, or you start a business with it, that's up to you. But every institution in Canada that brings international students to Canada has the core obligation, the primary obligation, which is to educate and to sort of make sure that you earn your diploma. It's very important. OCMT provides this support. So we provide support in the area of, one, there are employment opportunities out there that we can bring on your doorstep to sort of apply for. Two, there's some resume sort of, helping you to sort of fine-tuning your resume to make you more attractive, to prospective employers. And three, to organize sessions like this. Sessions like this to provide relevant information that would help you to make informed decisions, and also to kind of see how we can provide infrastructure for you to move from point A to point B towards the trajectory of your transition here in Canada. So just because I know that we have the time is not friendly right now. Now, one of the things that I have here is this: as a family class. So there is immigration. The immigration sort of category they call family class immigration. IRCC requests either of the spouses to be the principal applicant. So I am married and I have my kids. Okay, so I have come to Canada as OCMT student, and I have my partner with me, and we want to apply for permanent resident. Now, so we get to a point that, okay, the wife is telling the husband that, okay, I have to be the principal applicant because I am the international student. The wife is saying, no, even though you are the international student, I have a much better qualification from back home. So how do you advise those who are going on a family class, immigration? Who should be the principal applicant?
Yeah, good question. So typically those kinds of questions will come up where one is making an application under express entry, right? Which is part of the economic class, but it's usually under express entry. And if you remember, express entry is based on points, right? So the people with the most points are the ones who are likely going to be selected. So ultimately what we do is when a couple comes to us, we do an assessment to see who is going to have the most points. And whoever is likely to score the most points overall, that's the person who we recommend to be the principal applicant, right? Because you want ultimately to make a decision that favors your permanent residency application. So it comes down to, yes, your qualifications outside of Canada are important. But if you add your Canadian study certifications, designations, qualifications on top of that, you may find that that's likely going to push your score substantially above what it would be if you were only relying on your non-Canadian qualifications. And so in most situations, the spouse who studied in Canada will likely be the principal applicant. But that's not going to be the case in every situation. If you're married to somebody who has a PhD, right? already and tons of years of work experience and who is relatively young, is under 30 and all of that stuff, and you're coming here to do maybe a first degree, chances are that at the end of the day, when we do a calculation of your scores, you may be equal, or the PhD holder may still be slightly ahead. But that's the exception, not the norm. The norm is that the person who studied in Canada would have accumulated substantially more points to allow them to be the principal applicant.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you so much for that insight. Donovan, I found something strange, especially with regards to student visa application, right? And the sort of question that immigration sort of ask people. The House is ask them particular question when they are filling out the visa, and I'm going to tell you what. Perhaps you can sort of set me straight here, and this might also serve the audience. One of the questions visa application requests an applicant to state if they had any family relation in Canada. So you have been asked if you had family relations in Canada. Now, if you said yes to that question, so they tell you that, oh, no, they make a decision that, okay, we cannot guarantee that you will return back to your country, right? So, but it's strange. When you are filing for permanent residence, one of the areas to verify, they actually give you points for settlement in Canada if you have relative in Canada, right? So one way they're telling you that, no, if you have relative in Canada, they penalize you. On the other end, they're telling you because you have family in Canada, then they give you more points. How do you navigate between these complexities?
Yeah, and it's one of the ridiculous aspects of Canadian immigration law, quite frankly. And I know that one of the former immigration ministers acknowledged as much. So Canada's immigration system, as far as it pertains to international student, is a little bit absurd because it requires somebody who's applying to come to Canada to prove that they will not stay in Canada, but rather they will be going back home, right? So that's an obligation that's on the applicant. But at the same time, the very same immigration system has incentives in place to encourage an international student to remain in Canada once they've gotten to Canada. Certain work permit opportunities, certain permanent residency opportunities. So the two things are in opposition to each other, and it makes the system look ridiculous. And we just have to call it like it is. And it's a difficult thing to navigate. Because when clients submit a study permit application and they have family members in Canada, oftentimes the immigration authorities do come back and say, you know what, you have ties in Canada and we're not satisfied that because of those ties that you will want to return to your home country, right? But the applicant cannot, and we advise strongly against it. The applicant cannot not disclose that they have family members. You have to disclose, right? Because if you do not disclose, then you're going to be found to be inadmissible based on misrepresentation, which is a whole other thing, right? So you have to disclose, right? In any event, if you tell us as your lawyers that you have family members in Canada, but you don't want us to include it in the application, then we would have to withdraw. We wouldn't be able to submit that application on your behalf. That's how serious it is, right? So you have to disclose. But the absurd thing is that having a family in Canada is deemed to be reason, in some instances, for refusing an application. So what we do is we say to the client, you know what? I mean, you cannot fight the fact that you already have family here. It's just what it is. But what you can do is to show that you have more than enough incentive to want to return to your home country when you're done studying. So you'll argue that you have family members in your home country, so you have strong family ties back home as well. You may have financial ties back home. You may have you know, real estate, you know, or your family may have a business that you are a part of that your Canadian training is going to be required to assist with, you know, all of these legitimate arguments. That's where we would focus attention on, so as to convince the immigration officer that ultimately this person intends to go back to their home country after they're done studying in Canada. But it's just one of those crazy things that dogs Canada's immigration system, unfortunately.
Okay, excellent. And you actually, so you've answered like two questions in one right there. Because I wanted to sort of introduce some of the experiences of some of our students. So whereas immigration has two major reasons why they would decline application. Number one, the proof of fund, and number two, the proof of family ties. So I was just going to ask you, how do you prove your family ties? But you already answered that question, because now, so you have to provide examples. We've had cases of some of the students that provide the fact that, okay, they have their spouse back home, they have their kids back home, but they still decline them. Now, the question then comes down to, did you provide substantial evidence to show that, okay, there is a relationship between you and these family members? They did not.
Yeah, so, and Yomi, it goes beyond just family ties, right? It's ties to home country. Family is just one, right? You could have a job. You know, there's some people who are on study leave. You know, they have a decent job in their home country. Their employer has decided to give them a 1-year study leave or a 2-year leave of absence. So you have a job to go back to. So that's a tie, you know. Or, you know, some people have a family business back home that they're wanting to go back and support with. That's another tie. You know, some people have strong finances back home, you know, so those are also going to be ties. So your ties back home, it can be family, that definitely is important, but it can be a number of other things.
Yeah, so it can be a number of other things which you may not know as an applicant now. So does that make us to think that getting a visa, a study visa to come to Canada, is it a matter of luck or a matter of what?
Well, you know, I mean, I couldn't as a lawyer sit here and say it's a matter of luck. No, it comes down to how thorough the application is, you know. So that's a critical factor. But there is a role for what's called discretion, the officer's discretion. And that's where the problem is. You know, under Canada's immigration law, immigration officers are allowed what's called discretionary power, which means the officer is able to draw on their own subjective take on an application and refuse an application, and that's allowable. You know, unless, of course, their decision contradicts the facts, you know, presented, or their decision contradicts a particular law, or a mix of both. But outside of that, the officer's discretion plays a significant part. And that's why I said, you know, depending on where you're coming from, that's going to be a factor as well. And so you have to try to anticipate that by trying to be as thorough, as proactive as possible with your actual application. So just to give you an example, you know, when we're talking about proving to the officer that you have strong ties to your home country, you know, if you are employed currently with a good employer who is maybe willing to provide you with a leave of absence, or, you know, study leave, you might want to, rather than resigning from your job the minute you get accepted into a Canadian college, you might want to have a conversation with your employer and say, okay, is it possible for me to be given a leave of absence and a letter that confirms that I have a job to go back to when I'm done studying in Canada? You know, that is something that you're not asked to provide by the immigration authorities, but you, thinking proactively, are going to be trying to go above and beyond. And that applies across the board. You know, if you have family land or family business, you know, how about including proof of that in the application? You know, proof that you are a co-owner in the family business, or some kind of a support letter, and as lawyers, we try to find creative ways, creative but legitimate ways of helping you to make those arguments.
Excellent. So I like that sort of the injection of creativity, right? So creative but legitimate. And I always tell people that there is a sort of long route. There's a long route in life, and there's also a legitimate shortcut, right? So now a lawyer will find the delta between the two, right? So there's always a gap to sort of explore, not to exploit. Now, so that's very important to note. So talking about businesses, whether a personal business, whereas you sort of have there's some sort of historical background to that business in terms of the customers, the sort of the registration document and all of that, and just like you have to provide. There's no overwhelming document. There's not too much document. So you have to provide, you have to make it difficult for the visa officer to decline your application. So by providing everything that is necessary to make that decision. So good point. So two questions to go. So how are you feeling? Are you okay, Donovan, so far?
Yes. I mean, once we're done by 2:25, I'm good.
Okay, excellent, very good. Yes. So so from the why do you think a permanent resident application might be declined from internal sort of internal applications? Why do you think that application might be declined?
Yeah, a common reason. I mean, first of all, permanent residency applications, I mean, aren't declined frequently, right? Because when we're assessing an application, you have time to identify the issues, time to put strategies in place to address them in the actual application, right? However, if and when an application is declined, oftentimes it has to do with either issues around misrepresentation, where somebody may have made a claim in the application, that it turns out that that cannot be verified, or they may have omitted, they may have neglected to include something that should have been included, which is also technical misrepresentation under Canada's immigration rule. So that can be an issue, and I've seen many cases where that has come back to cause problems, and there are ways to overcome some of these, but I mean, a lot of people don't understand that their immigration record in Canada starts with the very first application they submit to Canada, right? So you may have submitted an application for a visitor visa 6 years ago unsuccessfully, but that's part of your record, and then any subsequent applications keep being added to your record. And then when it comes time to apply for permanent residency, your entire record is going to be looked at, right? So we've seen cases, for instance, where an applicant in a previous application maybe years ago, on the application form it asks you, have you ever been denied entry into a country, or have you ever been denied an immigration application or something like that, right? There's that question that everybody gets asked. And some, occasionally some people misunderstand it, or some people decide that they're going to say no, even though they had applied to go to the US and they were denied, or they applied to go to the UK and they were denied, because they don't understand that these countries share information. And so when it comes time for the PR application, that issue pops up, and it becomes a major concern, because that is viewed as a misrepresentation. And a misrepresentation means that you're going to be removed from Canada and you're barred from applying for any kind of Canadian application again for at least 5 years, right? So that we found oftentimes is one of the major reasons why a PR application can be refused.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So the last question is, what would be your advice to our listeners and the OCMT students, current students, and prospects? What would be your advice to them in terms of processing their visa application, either a study visa or permanent residence applications. Some of them want to do it yourself, so they want to do it on their own and all of that. So, how would you advise them going that way? Now, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but how would you advise them, in terms of doing it on their own?
Yes. So there are many people who've applied successfully on their own, but there are like 4 times as many people who've been unsuccessful because they chose to do it on their own, right? Our approach is that the first thing we do is we are very candid. We let applicants know that we cannot guarantee success. No immigration lawyer, no consultant, nobody can guarantee you a successful application, because ultimately the application is decided, the success of the application is decided by the Canadian immigration officer. What we guarantee is a thorough application, a thorough review of all the issues before you submit the application, so that we can say, okay, this is going to be an issue, this is going to be an issue. Let's strategize on how we address these issues in the application, so that at the end of the day, you're submitting the strongest application possible. We also take into consideration who is applying, where are you applying from, what kinds of questions will be going through the immigration officer's minds when they're reviewing your application, and how can we proactively try to address those before they get raised in the officer's minds. So those are going to be some of the things that anybody at all who is thinking of applying will want to take into consideration. And lastly, there's a reason why large corporations, some of whom are our clients, choose to have professionals do their applications rather than just having somebody inside of their HR team do it. There's a reason, and it's because they recognize the value that comes from having somebody who understands what to look for, handle their business for them.
Excellent, very good. And so I definitely allude with your perspective on that. You may not understand the value of a professional until you hire a rookie. So if you have, so I always tell folks that traveling from one country or relocating from one country to another country, it's a big shift, and you have to handle it as a project. So oftentimes, you see people applying to study at an institution, but they decided to take their own initiative applying for visa. So getting acceptance at an institution is as equally as important as getting a credible law firm to help you, through that situation. When you get declined, people don't feel good when they get declined. It's sort of, it has psychological effect when people get declined. Now, we do not have sort of, taking a proactive measure by engaging, a firm that can help you out, that can answer all those technical questions. One of the things coming from continent of Africa is we have a different orientation when it comes to answering certain questions. And sometimes you have to be very diplomatic the way you sort of approach certain questions, especially your funding, proving that you have a tie. It can be quite, notoriously difficult to approach certain questions that may seek to disqualify you without even listening to you. And unfortunately, also, we have the Canadian immigration system whereby you apply for visa, they don't see you, they make a decision without seeing your face. So you don't have access to be interviewed. So who makes that call on your behalf is everything that you provide to these immigration officials, documents and all of that. So making sure that all these documents are in order, making sure that you have been able to attend to all these questions are very important. And one of the things that I know that you're going to probably agree with me, Donovan, is the letter of explanation. Your letter of explanation is one of the vital documents that you would ever provide when you're applying for visa. And we've had different scenarios of that. Students apply for visa from Asia continent, they declined them, and 1 week after they reapply, and they accepted them. because of what they changed, they fine-tune their letter of explanation. So it's always important for you to sort of get all these things right. And I want to thank you, Donovan, for sort of sharing your time with us today. I think it's been a great time having you on this call. And for all our audience, thank you so much for joining us from different parts of Africa, Asia, and beyond. This is OCMT. We're happy to sort of have you. I'm sure at some point you've been in contact with any of our staff, or you've applied at one point or the other, or you are considering, coming to OCMT. It's always a pleasure to have you here. And when it comes to support, we can always rely on Goose Law Firm. Goose Law Firm is a prominent law firm in Canada. They specialize, in immigration, so they've handled immigration application on different levels. So you don't have to be afraid that, okay, when I finish my program, I'm going to be sent back to my country. No, if you go through the right step, regularize your stay while studying, you can apply for your permanent resident while studying at OCMT. And by the time you finish your program, update your document with your diploma from OCMT. Is a possibility. So there are a number of possibilities that exist in the country. So don't be put off by the fact that, okay, you don't know the path towards regularizing your stay. So now you have the doors of opportunity open onto you. So you just need to enter into it. Now we've opened the door. So now you see the opportunity, you knock the door and you enter. So thank you so much again, Goose Law Firm, represented by Donovan, for that sort of insightful information you provided to folks. Folks, now you've heard it all. Information moves the world. Okay, so the degree of information that you have will determine how prosperous you will be in life. So it's very important to bear that in mind. Please, we have another session coming up in the future. Join us if you have the time. Feel free to join us. We're going to be bringing another expert who was an alumni of this institution, currently working with Deloitte Canada as their senior manager. John is currently a university lecturer at the University of Ottawa who came here just barely about 7-8 years ago. So if there are so many stories that are possible, yours is also possible. You don't have to be just employee alone. You can also be an employer of labor in Canada. You can bring your business to Canada. You can establish businesses in Canada. But more importantly, make sure that while in Canada, you do not violate the condition of your permit. It's very important. So thank you so much all. Have a great weekend, and we hope to see you at some point at OCMT campus. Donovan, thank you for your time. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and all the best, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.